Welcome, friends. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, with your thought for the day, October 18th, 2015. And it seems no matter where you turn online for your news today, you're going to encounter headlines, some of them hyperventilating, others somewhat factual, about a shocking new memo that reveals shocking revelations of a shocking truth about the Iraq War. Who would have thunk it? For example, Iranian Press TV, Bush-Blair plotted Iraq War 1 year before invasion had started, White House memo. Or the Orwell Big Brother Corporation here, Tony Blair will help U.S. on Iraq, 2002 memo says. Iranian NDTV, former British PM Tony Blair committed UK to Iraq War year before invasion, report. As I say, this is hitting a lot of different news outlets today, but interestingly, unbelievably, the best coverage, by far the most detailed coverage, and I believe the coverage that this all sources from, is the Daily Fail, yes, the Mail on Sunday, which I believe broke the story. Smoking gun emails reveal Blair's deal in blood with George Bush over Iraq War was forged a year before the invasion had even started. Leaked White House memo shows Prime Minister's support for war at summit with U.S. President in 2002. Bombshell document shows Blair preparing to act as spin doctor for Bush, who was told the UK will follow our lead. Publicly, Blair still claimed to be looking for a diplomatic solution, in direct contrast to email revelations, and new light was shed on Bush-Blair relations by material disclosed by Hillary Clinton at the order of the U.S. courts. Yes, the delicious irony of this is that this leaked memo comes from that data purge that Hillary Clinton is undergoing with her U.S. State Department private email brouhaha. So interestingly, this memo, as I say, the best, most in-depth coverage I've seen here on the Mail on Sunday. Lots of coverage, including a line-by-line breakdown of what this memo is talking about and what it means. But the actual memo here, let's take a look at it. On Iraq, Blair will be with us should military operations be necessary. So keep in mind, this is April 5th to 7th, 2002, a meeting at Crawford Ranch between Tony Blair and President Bush at that time. Blair will be with us should military operations be necessary, 1 year before the invasion. He is convinced on 2 points: the threat is real and success against Saddam will yield more regional success. And goes on to say Blair may suggest ideas on how to, 1, make a credible public case on current Iraqi threats to international peace, 2, keep Iraq's neighbors on our side, 3, handle calls for UNSC blessing that can increase support for us in the region, and 4, demonstrate that we have thought through the day after. Every single one of those points is just ridiculous in hindsight, isn't it? For example, number 1, make a credible public case on current Iraqi threats to international peace. Of course, there was no credible public case to be made because Iraq was not a threat to international peace. And we know that from many different sources. For example, we know that Blair tried to make the case through his sexed up WMD dossier on Saddam's weapons of mass destruction that we know was sexed up by one of the insiders, Dr. David Kelly, the UN weapons inspector, who blew the whistle on that and promptly ended up dead. People who don't know the story will best be served by going back to episode 192 of the Corbett Report podcast, Requiem for the Suicided Dr. David Kelly, for the full story. I'll put the link in the show notes, of course. Number 2, keep Iraq's neighbors on our side. That's particularly humorous, or not really funny, but ha-ha funny, but, well, sadly humorous, given what's happening in the region surrounding Iraq right now, of course, with Syria right on the border there. 3, handle calls for a UNSC blessing that can increase support for us in the region. Well, of course, there was no UNSC blessing, and Kofi Annan, who was then the UN Secretary General, came out to say that the Iraq invasion was illegal, and then, of course, the UN offices in Iraq at the time were bombed. So that's how they roll. And then 4, demonstrate that we have thought through the day after. Again, what a ridiculous joke, considering, of course, the breaking up of Iraq along sectarian lines and the rise of the Islamic State and the complete disintegration of any semblance of stability in the region. But then again, that was the plan all along, wasn't it? And again, we know that was the plan all along because we know, for example, we've known since 2007, General Wesley Clark in the bowels of the Pentagon, 10 days after 9/11, getting the full rundown on how they were going to invade Iraq and several other countries too.
And I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. he said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir.
You bet your Billy Bobka, as Balky Bartakamus, I'm sure, would tell us anyway. Yes, so we've known for years and years about the 7-nation plan, which is not on schedule. Of course, it's taking more than 5 years, but every single one of those countries is threatening to, or has been toppled, or is being threatened to be toppled, of course, with Iran next on the chopping block, if Syria falls in the way that the Western powers want it to fall. But it gets even worse than that. That's right, not only have we known since 2007 that Iraq was being invaded, the plan was already on the table 10 days after 9/11, but we've known for a decade now, since May 1st, 2005, about the Downing Street Memo, which of course dates back from 23rd of July 2002. It was a prime ministerial meeting at which it was, well, a lot of interesting details were discussed, including, again, keep in mind, July 2002, military action in Iraq now seen as inevitable. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action justified by the conjunction of terrorism and WMD, but the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. Remember that? Remember that little phrase? Yeah, this is where it comes from, the Downing Street Memo, downingstreetmemo.com. You can read the memo and why it is and was so important to really document what we had already known, which is that they had planned the Iraq war well in advance and nothing was going to deter them because they were fixing the facts around the policy. Yes, David Kelly tried to warn people as well. And yes, even more ridiculously, so this was May 2005. In February 2006, we had the White House memo, the so-called White House memo. Remember that one? Blair-Bush deal before Iraq war revealed in secret memo. PM promised to be solidly behind U.S. invasion with or without backing. Again, that was from January 2003, so a little bit later, but still months and months before the actual invasion, and when we were being told they were still seeking diplomatic channels. One of the most ridiculous revelations from that one, Mr. Bush told Mr. Blair that the U.S. was so worried about the failure to find hard evidence against Saddam that it thought of flying U-2 reconnaissance aircraft planes with fighter cover over Iraq, painted in UN colors. Mr. Bush added, if Saddam fired on them, he would be in breach of UN resolutions. A literal false flag provocation, which Blair actually tried to talk, well, I guess did talk Bush out of doing, but still, painting planes up in UN colors to try to get Saddam to shoot him down. Unbelievable, that the extent that they were going to. And again, we've known about this for years and years. 9 years now we've known about the White House memo. So does it seem like we're getting the same story regurgitated to us over and over and over and over again? Wow, surprising. Who would have thought it? There was a deal in blood forged a year before the invasion. Yes, we already knew about that deal. We know that Blair and Bush were fixing facts around the policy. We know that they had determined that military action was inevitable. We know that they were just only quibbling about how to sell it to the public and how to sell it to the world. And that was the only thing they were even discussing for that year run up to the invasion. So this is not news. This is not anything that should be surprising to anyone who has had even one eye open over the past decade and a half. And if you know about this, great, awesome, wonderful. If this is all Groundhog Day to you, well, join the club. But please spread this info in this context. Spread this video to people around you who still don't quite get why the establishment mouthpiece media is disintegrating in front of our eyes, why it is the train is falling off the rails, and why they are such a laughingstock. It's exactly because of things like this. And that's not even conjecture. We can go to the latest Gallup poll, September 28th, 2015. Americans' trust in media remains at historic low. Surprise, surprise. And here's the graph of trust in mass media, a great deal or a fair amount. Well, back in late 90s, early 2000s, you had the peak peak at 99, and around the peak after 9/11 and in the Iraq War run-up, you had 54%. And then the Iraq War invasion happened, and wow, wouldn't you imagine that? It just suddenly dropped 10%. Wow, people just suddenly stopped trusting the media. I wonder why, if there's any relation there with what happened in Iraq. And then it's never really recovered since then, and now, of course, it remains at the historical low. 40%, still 40% too high, but at least it is an historic low, which should be, well, again, it should tell us something, that after the Iraq War, lies were sold to us by the establishment mouthpiece press. Suddenly, the establishment mouthpiece press didn't look so good. And what was happening around this time as well? Oh, that's right, the rise of the blogosphere and the internet. So, yes, I think Americans and people around the world are making their choices in media quite a bit differently than they were a decade and a half ago. And that's for the good, but still not good enough, because we're still getting the same stories recycled to us over and over as if it is actually news. Well, it isn't, and it shouldn't be for anyone with their head screwed on straight. Which, unfortunately, I guess is not a lot of the public these days. At any rate, again, please do share this information. This is not a news story. This should not surprise us. The only thing that this should tell us is that people who were not outraged enough to do anything about it the first time this was revealed to us will certainly not be any more outraged a decade later. 1 decade in advance, when people have almost forgotten, oh yeah, the Iraq War, that kind of happened, didn't it? Anyway, 1 million people dead, but who really cares? Oh, by the way, yeah, it was all planned a year before, and it was all a pack of lies that was sold to you. And in the next story, well, there is no next story, because that is really the only story that matters. They lie to you constantly. Don't believe them. Reporting for the alternative media, James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.